All right, the disturbing and controversial video game iceberg.
Hello everybody, today we are going to be talking about the disturbing and controversial video game iceberg. It's been a while since I've covered an iceberg, and since a lot of people have seen my video on the disturbing movie iceberg, I figured that the disturbing video game iceberg
I watched that
was
one
quite
another day.
fitting. Now I put together this iceberg myself, and it's exclusively made up of the worst I could find. A lot of the icebergs I see about disturbing video games will spend the first few dozen entries with things like Resident Evil or Silent Hill.
Okay,
and since a lot of you guys are probably already familiar with those, I want to get to the good stuff first.
Give me the juicy
not
shit.
good stuff, terrible and traumatizing stuff, but good for the channel. Every entry on this list has raised some level of social, political, or moral issue.
Oh boy.
We're going to start with games that are just kind of strange or trying too hard to be edgy, and from there we're going to get into things that I consider legitimately terrifying. And as I mentioned, most of these, especially near the bottom, are so terrifying because of their
I don't think there's a video
real-world
on that. Maybe I should make a video about that.
consequence. And to give myself some parameters, there's a couple of rules that I've set up for this iceberg. For one, I'm sticking primarily to developer publications. What I mean by that is if we're trying to look for video games that are just offensive or crude, there are hundreds of mods and fan-made games that people just made at home to be edgy or funny. So to prevent myself from talking about like 12 RPG Maker titles that are all disturbing in the same way, I am sticking to things that were made by companies or known game developers. Now there's a couple of exceptions for that, for individual mods or games that were made by a single creator that garnered a lot of infamy and became popular in the disturbing video game genre. But for the most part, I'm trying to stay away from edgy one-offs that were just trying to be shocking. My other rule is that in order to keep me from talking about like 10 different games that are all the same kind of disturbing, a lot of these games are representative for their whole category. For example, instead of going into detail about like 20 games that all have racist themes, I just have one entry that kind of encapsulates that whole idea.
Okay,
Same
cool.
with things like sexual violence or mass murder. Again, just to keep this video from being 5 hours of me describing the same horrible things over and over again. I fear that some of you all may watch that, but I choose not to do that to you, so you're welcome. I also want to mention before we get started, I know that I've been slacking on the uploads lately, and I apologize. I have a lot of really, really cool and fun projects in the works that I can't talk about yet. Hopefully whenever I can talk about them, you all will think that it was worth the lack of videos, because I certainly think that it is, but you're just going to have to trust me for now. Sorry that there hasn't been a lot of videos lately. There will be more on the way soon. I still love you guys, and thank you so much for the support in my absence. It really does mean the world. And with that out of the way, we can go ahead and get into a long compilation of me telling you about the most depressing, brutal, and disturbing things that I could find on the internet.
Sweet.
Because for some reason,
Hell
this
yeah.
is how I chose to
Get cozy.
live. But do you know what's even more disturbing than that?
What's up?
That's right, your diet. Yeah, that's
Oh,
right,
boy.
that's right.
Ad
You
time.
can't hide from me. I see you in there. I see you with your
long
half-closed
as this
bags
ad?
of potato chips and empty peanut butter jars and soda cans thrown across the room like an animal. It's disgusting.
I'm just
Back
gonna
to the
skip it.
video.
All right, yeah,
we
Factor.
are going to go ahead and get into it, but as always,
I feel
safe
bad skipping
and
ads.
delicious. I understand that cooking your own healthy meals at home can be very time consuming. So a lot of the time I'll just order takeout, but then I'm paying too much for a meal that I know isn't good for me. But with Factor, all of these problems are solved as they deliver fresh, healthy food to your door
That looked like-
that is as affordable as it is tasty. From a wide variety of foods that can include everything from
That looked
breakfast
amazing.
meals like sausage, eggs, or pancakes, to delicious dinners like surf and turf meals or pastas. Factor makes fast and healthy meals a reality without causing damage to your wallet or palate. The best endorsement I can give for Factor is whenever Factor sent me the products to try out, I never had it before, so I tried it with my whole family to get their opinions. And ever since then, my mom has been pushing me to make this ad so that she can use the discount code to order food for the next couple months. So we're
sure.
already sold. From a variety of affordable entrees, side dishes, and even smoothies, Factor is the best way to get healthy, delicious food delivered right to your door. And you can get in on this fantastic product at a major discount, Because right now, if you go to factor75.com or go to the link in the description and use the discount code Wendigoon50, you'll be able to get your first Factor box for 50% off. That is right, half off your first Factor box, and get in on gourmet meals that make you feel better about how much you're spending and what you're putting in your body. Again, that's factor75.com or the link in the description with discount code Wendigoon50 to get half off your Factor order today. Thank you all so much for watching the ad, and thank you so much to Factor for sponsoring the video. It really does mean the most. Hope you all check them out. Link is in the description, and that means Mom, right now, go to the link in the description. And we are back to the video. We are going to go ahead and get into it, but as always, thank you for watching. On the first tier, we're going to be looking at a lot of the more popular titles, things that either garnered a lot of attention with the media, or things that are just kind of bizarre or abstract in their
Flash
creation
games
to begin with. Beginning with our first title, Erebos, or Erebos, or however you're supposed to pronounce this. So when I went through and picked this Iceberg, like I said in the beginning, I have rules for why I added stuff, but really I just put something on here if I found it interesting, because why talk about something that bores me, right? So this one, I'll be completely level with you, isn't disturbing at all. This is just a really weird concept that I've never heard done again, and I had to tell someone.
Okay.
So in Erebos, you play as a vampire who is trying to kill a vampire hunter cult, to my understanding. It was developed by Greek studio NYX and published in 2002 for the PC. Now, while some consider this game to be disturbing because it uses real photographs of actors, something that was much more common in the early 2000s with PC games, and it features some kind of bloody depictions of those actors being killed, that's not what I find interesting about this game at all. What's interesting about this game is that, if you'll remember, you play as a vampire, right? So if you try to turn on the game when it's still daylight, wherever you live, whatever time zone you have set, the game won't let you play it because vampires aren't supposed to be out in the day.
That's pretty funny.
Instead, giving you this error message. So it is a video game that can exclusively be played either by changing the date and time on your system or wait for nightfall.
Oh my
and
God.
Yeah, insert joke about gamers only come out at night, haha. But in reality, while interesting, while I think it's kind of cute or whatever, this is one of the worst ideas I have ever heard. Imagine going to a pitch now to try to sell your product, and you have to tell them that the product is only accessible for half of the buyer's lifetime. The game never garnered a lot of popularity outside of a small cult following, and I've never seen this concept done again to my knowledge.
I mean, there is like
and
real-time
there's
shit.
Good reason for that. And while I don't consider the game to be disturbing at all, I found this in research and I wasn't going to not talk about it. So on to our first real entry, we have PETA Flash games.
All right.
So a lot of you are probably familiar with PETA, the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. And a lot of you are also probably familiar with the shenanigans they get up to at animal protests.
The shenanigans,
While a lot of us are familiar that PETA always has a strange way to protest for the rights of animals, a lot of you may not know that they developed a series of Flash games to protest as well. And they can be accessed from PETA's website. This includes games like Whole Lotta Lies, where you play as a pig in a slaughterhouse who is trying to escape from the slaughterhouse workers. You can also speak to other pigs who are afraid of what's to come and think that the end is near. The message of the game being that while you can run for a really long time, the game always ends the same way, with you being caught and killed by the workers in the slaughterhouse. There's Monkey Fright, where you play as a monkey in a laboratory trying to free other monkeys and evade scientists, which, as someone who tried to play it, I can say is the worst platform controls I have ever seen.
Oh my God.
A beat 'em up with horrible hit detection that has you go through settings like a military base and a research facility while fighting doctors and soldiers to release all of the imprisoned animals. And of course, my favorite by far, J-Lo, Monster in Fur, which is a game that has you running from Jennifer Lopez as she tries to stop you from educating people on the dangers of fur clothing, as well as freeing the animals that she plans to slaughter to make more fur coats. I mean, look at this. This is incredible. How can you not love it? While a lot of these games have some blood that is purposefully
That's pretty good.
dramatic to get their point across, the real controversial element to the games is the fact that they exist in order to push their agenda.
Right.
Which, if you agree with that agenda or not, is totally up to you. I just found out that PETA makes all these weird video games, and I had to tell you about
What if
it.
they've made any recent
LSD
ones?
Dream Emulator, and yes, that is its real title, was made by Osamu Sato in 1998. Now, LSD Dream Emulator is outright a form of interpretive art. It doesn't try to be a standard video game. As a matter of fact, Osamu stated multiple times that he made this for people who do not enjoy or can't play standard video games. So LSD Dream Emulator was made for the PlayStation as a sort of art exhibit. The only real feature the game gives you besides a start menu is a map that allows you to see what section of the dream you are currently located in, with the only objective, if you could even call it that, being to travel from one location to the other and simply experience the world you're in. Osamu built the landscapes based on inspirations he had from his own lucid dreams, as well as dream journals from those he knew. Because of this, several people who see the game says that it gives them an intense feeling of familiarity, despite the incredibly alien format most of these worlds exist in. Given the drastic contrast between elements of the world that are known and elements that are staunchly unknown, many believe LSD Dream Emulator to be the first piece of media that really captured the horror of liminal spaces. And while I find this horror fascinating, as it kind of exists as the grandfather to concepts of things like the back rooms today, I also think this game is absolutely hilarious because it was made for the PlayStation 1, and while it never really saw distribution in the United States, it did see some level of attention in Japan. So there was probably a young child who turned on his PlayStation to play Crash Bandicoot or some jet ski game or whatever, and turned on this and was never the same person again. Night Trap was made in 1992 for the Sega CD. The game featured FMV cutscenes, which again was very popular at the time, not so much nowadays. In the game, you the player are eavesdropping on a girl's slumber party that is being attacked by vampires. To protect them,
I think I've heard of this.
You have to move to the viewpoints of different cameras within the house and set off things like traps in order to stop the girls from being harmed. While I think this is a really cool idea, especially for the time,
it is pretty cool.
I can tell you that the plot or the acting is nothing to write home about. What made this game so controversial is that if you failed, your game over screen would typically be the death of one of the girls. I mean, nothing to us cool kids that, grew up on Live Leak or whatever. This was a problem for a lot of parents at the time because in 1992, there was no rating system for video games. So at the 1993 committee hearing where they had the whole discussion of how video games should be regulated and what their rating system should be, Night Trap was brought up alongside titles like Mortal Kombat. And a lot of people attribute the B-movie-esque killings of Night Trap to the reason that you can't buy an M-rated game without your parents' permission. Again, not that disturbing by today's standards, or for adults at all really, but an important footnote in the history of disturbing media. The first entry of Postal, which was developed by Running with Scissors, was released in 1997. While there have been 4 entries in the series, Postal 2 is the one everyone remembers. The game allows players to go on mundane daily tasks, or cause a whole lot of havoc. If I had to describe Postal to someone who wasn't familiar with it, I would describe it as what boomers think GTA is. You know how you always hear on the news, they're like, oh, in GTA, the goal of the game is to run people over and then shoot them with guns and light them on fire. And it's like, sure, you can do that, but that's not really like, what the game's about. In Postal, that is absolutely what the game is about. It's very satirical and very over-the-top in its presentation, but graphic nonetheless. Sure, a lot of games will let you set someone on fire or shoot them, but in Postal, you can pee on their corpse, which is really what it's all about. It's graphic and over-the-top because that's exactly what it sets out to be. And while we're on the topic of games that made the news lose their mind for a couple months whenever it came out, let's talk about Manhunt. Manhunt was developed by Rockstar North, and the first game came out in 2003, with the sequel coming out in 2007. In Manhunt, you play as a man named James Earl Cash, I'm not kidding, as he is forced to participate in multiple snuff films. Most notably in the game, Whenever a player performs an execution kill, the camera cuts to a grimy handheld camcorder that would likely be seen in a snuff film production.
Oh,
The
God.
game didn't garner that much attention from mainstream media when it first came out. It was the next year in 2004 when a 14-year-old boy was murdered in the UK, and the media began to blame the killing on the game Manhunt. The news around this time had a field day talking about how the killer was motivated by the game and he would play the game over and over again, and it's because of the game he decided to murder this child. But the only quote I could find that ever referenced Manhunt at all was the parents of the victim said regarding the killer, "I think his friends mentioned that he played it," which is pretty much just a speculation. Because
Right.
of that, Manhunt hit the news cycle and became the next subject for the whole "are video games bad for kids" debate. So in response, in 2007, Manhunt
No
2
way.
was way worse than Manhunt 1.
Jesus.
Whereas Manhunt 1 had a story, and it was just a particularly brutal story meant for adults, Manhunt 2 relished much more in the brutality of it.
That's pretty funny.
Because that was the thing that got the game popular. So people ragged on the game for being disturbing, and Rockstar North turned the dial up to 11. On to Tier 2, these are mostly games that are still kind of edgy or bizarre, just more so. Ugetsu Catan was made by the Tonkin House in 1996. I'm sure I pronounced none of that right, but we're just going to keep going. The game involves you playing as a character who recently attempted suicide, or possibly succeeded in it, but then a ghost brought you back, but then you're alive at the end, but it's a Japanese game, it's weird. The reason it's on this list is because at various sections in the game, the ghost takes you down these very strange and, like I said, Japanese settings, with each set piece being the story of a different individual who took their own life, or just in general monsters of the afterlife. While this is bizarre in its own right, where the game gets interesting is that given its themes of suicide, there are several who believe that several of the faces depicted within the game
are real
of
faces?
suicide victims. Now, of course, this isn't confirmed anywhere, and it's just an urban legend surrounding the game.
That'd be
but given the
kinda
bizarre
fucked.
nature of the game itself, you can see why. Hatred was created by Destructive Creations in 2015. In the Hatred, you play as a guy who has decided that humanity is awful and then goes on a rampage. The game is just you slaughtering as many people you can with as many executions and different weapons as possible.
Jesus.
The ending of the game has your character making it to a nuclear facility where he blows up the facility in order to cause the maximum casualties. The game received so much backlash on its release that it was temporarily taken down from Steam.
I've heard this
or more
game.
specifically, it was pulled from Steam's Greenlight program. However, eventually, it was put back up. Now here's what's interesting. There's a story that Gabe Newell, the Valve founder who all the memes are made about, apologized for the game and then had it taken down. When it seems in actuality, he apologized to the dev team of Hatred for taking the game down in the first place, citing freedom of expression and whatnot. And because of the controversy and how much attention getting taken off Greenlight garnered, Hatred got so much support that it eventually came out in full. And after this game that everyone was clamoring for finally came out, they universally decided that it was mid. Which the selling point of the game is the brutality and absurdism of it all, not, great controls or story. I'm not even going to pretend I'm pronouncing this one correctly. Roly Polies no Nana Korobi Yoki. Yeah, Nana Korobi Yoki? Sure. Translated, the title means Roly Polies falling down 7 times and getting up 8, which is a saying in Japan, to my understanding. This game was released in 1997
Oh God, what the fuck?
and made by Osamu Sato, the same guy who did the LSD Dream emulator game, which when you look at the two side by side, you can probably guess that. Roly Polies was supposed to be a game to help young children learn new languages. However, instead, it became a game to help young children develop new nightmares, because these are some of the most terrifying character models I have ever seen. It's also in that weird, uncanny age of early CGI,
God, what
so
the fuck?
That doesn't help.
That's like Five Nights at Freddy.
What's so interesting and also disturbing about this game is while you've probably seen a lot of games or videos in this aesthetic, the whole, mascot horror or creepy games for kids idea, this does it all natural. It was a game for children
It wasn't
that just so
intentionally.
happened to accidentally be nightmare fuel.
Yeah.
And while the game is a cult hit, as you can imagine, it didn't sell well at the time because people thought it was terrifying.
Yeah.
I also think it's kind of hilarious how the artist who did LSD Dream Emulator, and we can understand the idea of kind of out there or, you know, heady art pieces that are kind of disturbing and scary, but weirdly comforting in a different sense. Like, we can process that. But that guy took that same mindset and was like, if we bend the shapes and colors we built here into this, they can teach children the alphabet. For our last one on tier 2, we have by far my favorite on tier 2, Left Behind Eternal Forces. Left Behind Eternal Forces
is it a Rapture game?
Is a Christian real-time strategy game based off of the Left Behind book series. It was made by Inspired Media Entertainment in 2006 and places the Tribulation Force against the global community peacekeepers. The Tribulation Force being the remnant of the Christians left after the Rapture, and the global community peacekeepers being a part of the New World Order. In the single-player mode, you play as the Tribulation Force as you try to battle against the New World Order while also converting people to Christianity. You also need to manage your resources for the survivors at your base camp and also keep your men in the field supplied so that they can get new converts. While you do have weapons, you want to use them sparingly and only when you have to, because killing people lowers your spirit level and causes more people to defect and choose not to convert. In the multiplayer mode, you play against other players as either, again, the Tribulation Force or the New World Order. And to all that, I ask, who was this game for? Because, well, the obvious answer you may think is, oh, well, it's for Christians who are really into RTS games, I guess.
Right.
But no, it's not, because it's like making a weird mockery of it. The idea that there's like a point system for how many converts you have, and that there's a spirit level that takes you further from God the more people you shoot. And it's definitely not for non-super Christians, because who's gonna pick up a game called Left Behind otherwise? The game had several critics on either side of the aisle. Again, people who were not Christian thought the concept was ridiculous, and people who were thought it was a mockery, especially because in the online mode you can effectively play as the Antichrist. And eventually, the game faded into obscurity. One of the funniest stories I found around this game is they planned to include this in a care package program for American soldiers in the Middle East.
No way.
But after all this public backlash started, they
the
decided
fuck?
against it. So there was a
Oh my
chance
God.
for a while that there were going to be soldiers on their mid-2000s computers in the middle of Iraq playing as the Antichrist to mow down their friend who's converting people to Christianity.
Jesus Christ, dude.
Do with that what you will. With that, we are on to Tier 3, and within Tier 3, we're going to look at more real-world disturbing factors,
Kanye
as well as
Quest
games that,
3030.
again, push the envelope in a political or media sense.
Well, so many Quest
Starting with our
games.
first entry, Hong Kong 97, which was developed by Happysoft in 1995. Hong Kong 97 is a satirical game about what might happen if the people of China invade the land of Hong Kong. The setting of the gameplay being, and I'm not kidding, Bruce Lee's relative shows up in Hong Kong to kill every Chinese person in the world. So it's very ridiculous, over the top, and made for a laugh. Except, if the player dies, on the game over screen, there is a photo of what appears to be a real dead body. Now, this
Jesus.
was a huge question for a long time. Why on earth does this random parody game have just a dead body for seemingly no reason? But thanks to Gooseboost on YouTube, which I'll link his video in the description, it turns out this was in fact a real dead body.
Holy fuck.
It comes from the documentary Death Files, which I talked about in the disturbing movie Iceberg, and it turns out the corpse shown in the game over screen is the corpse of a man who was killed in the Bosnian Civil War. And it's presented so unceremoniously, I can only imagine the creator of Hong Kong 97 just didn't really think about it. They're like, oh, well, your character dies, so we'll show a dead guy.
Yeah.
Which is really sad, if you think about it. Kanye Quest 3030 is a turn-based RPG that centers around a fictional story
Looks like
regarding Kanye West.
Half-Life.
The game is about Kanye West going to the year 3030 to fight all of these different rappers and artists in the future. The game itself is just lighthearted and fun. It has things like lyrical references and song titles to use as weapons or defense in battle. And on the surface, the game just seems to be an easygoing RPG title.
Yeah, it's goofy.
It is, until you dig a little deeper. Nextpo made a great video about all of this, which I will link in the description, but the short version is that many believe Kanye Quest 3030 to be the hub of a cult known as Ascensionism. Several ciphers and codes that are found within the game lead people to believe that it is either a recruitment tool for the cult or it is used by a hub for cult members. Eventually, people found enough information to contact developers of the game who supposedly were a part of this cult, and several of these supposed cult members asked users to send in things like their full name, address, and images of
What
themselves.
the fuck?
Now later on
Okay,
into the
that's
Iceberg,
weird.
we're going to get into a lot of what I believe to be real scary, cult activities and video game stuff. Or at least things that I think have more potential to be legitimate, because in all my research of Kanye Quest 3030, I'm pretty sure all of the ciphers and codes and whatnot are done to just drive attention towards the game, and they're kind of building a sort of ARG. But it is real that they ask people for pictures of themselves and names and whatnot, and that is always scary online. Never do that, ever.
Yeah.
Even if you do want to join a cult. If they're a good cult, they'll already have pictures of you. They should have done their homework. And on the note of things that are probably fake, but I'm going to talk about them anyway because it'd be a lot cooler if they were real, we have Station.exe. Station.exe was a comedically simplistic game that was uploaded to 4chan. The poster said that the disc was for sale at a local venue and there was no information about it. When loading into the game, we see that it is as simplistic as a design for this quote-unquote station could possibly be. The player just walks from room to room, seeing a few things that appear to be generators and, I guess, grass around the facility itself with a bridge leading away from it. However, after a few minutes of walking around, really strange noises start to play, and then these giant floating polygon heads begin to follow the player. When they make contact with the player, they do damage, and upon dying, the game crashes. One player noticed that on the outside wall of one of the buildings were coordinates.
Oh,
when typing
God,
in
dude.
those coordinates, we can see that it takes you to a location in Siberia. This Siberian station is an abandoned diamond mine that has a striking resemblance to the structure within
What the fuck?
Station.exe. Now, this abandoned diamond mine is in a prohibited area of Siberia, so no one's able to go up and check out the location for themselves. And to that effect, why on earth does this game have a potentially one-for-one recreation of an abandoned station building at a diamond mine in the middle of Siberia? Digging into the game's files, there were connections to old messages that were left on the weapons board of 4chan, but that probably makes sense because if the game was made as a sort of hoax,
Oh, God.
then there were archived posts brought in from 4chan to freak out people on 4chan who might see them. So that's all well and good. But why on earth would it just be this random building in the middle of the tundra for seemingly no reason? I suppose maybe the person who created the game saw the abandoned building on like Google Earth or something and decided to recreate it in his game to be creepy. But even then, like, what on earth does the giant heads mean and everything
Yeah, that's
else?
weird.
It's such a strange little mystery. I hope it's something terrifying. It would make me so happy. Quest for Saddam was
Yeah,
made
same.
by Petrilla Entertainment in 2003. Now, Quest for Saddam was an over-the-top shooter that was a parody of Saddam Hussein and of Middle Eastern militants that just had a bunch of stereotypes and featured the player going through with Doom-esque controls and just shooting everyone they come across, eventually killing Saddam Hussein himself. And while there were a ton of these edgy games, especially in the early 2000s, like Muslim Massacre or Zog's Nightmare, the reason I want to mention Quest for Saddam is because Quest for Saddam got like a weird amount of attention in the news, and not in the way things like Postal or Manhunt did, but like positive attention. Like people saw it and thought it was interesting. and that it was a fun way to interact with the war on terror, I guess. So in response, the Global Islamic Media Front made a counter to Quest for Saddam called Quest for Bush, which was pretty much the exact same game, only all of the character models of the Middle Eastern soldiers you kill were switched over to American soldier models, and at the end of the game, instead of killing Saddam, you kill President George Bush.
Oh my God.
Like, sure, there's been a ton of propaganda games that were made by one agency to push one ideology or another or whatever, but it's rare to see one side make a game where you kill the other side's leader, so the other side literally goes, no you, and decides to kill the president. To be honest, I don't know if something like that has ever happened again, but it should. That's hilarious. Moving into Tier 4, we're getting into the heavy stuff. Starting with our first title, Super Columbine Massacre RPG.
Oh, God. Oh, I heard
Super
about this.
Columbine Massacre RPG was developed by Danny Leedon in 2005. The game is, as it says, an RPG where you play as Eric and Dylan on the day of the Columbine shooting. Eric and Dylan, of course, being the two shooters of the Columbine Massacre. The game, as you could imagine, is very brutal. It opens with Eric's mother waking him up on the day of the shooting, Eric and Dylan making the bombs that they plant at the school, which never actually go off, and then you take control as Eric and Dylan massacre as many people as possible. After the shooting, as in real life, Eric and Dylan take their own lives, and in the game, their bodies are shown along with a montage of news footage and witnesses and statements of victims' families. However, this is only the halfway point of the game, as it then goes to Eric and Dylan in hell fighting off demons. And this is not played in a horrific or serious tone at all. The two of them remark that this is like Doom, and eventually they make their way to a plaza where they meet various dead historical figures and fictional characters like Oppenheimer or Ronald Reagan.
What the fuck?
As well as characters like Pikachu and Mario and Homer Simpson.
Mario's down in hell?
Ends with them fighting
oh my
the
God,
South Park
look at that.
version of Satan, and then Satan saying they did a good job in that whole kill spree thing. So it's strange for a lot of reasons.
That is weird.
But perhaps most strange by the words the creator has said about it. So Danny, the creator of the game, says that the reason he made the game is because when he was in high school, he was bullied a lot in a similar manner to how Eric and Dylan were bullied, and it got to the point that he began to desire to hurt these people who were doing this to him.
Wow.
And it wasn't until Danny watched A Clockwork Orange that he said while watching the movie, he recognized that just because society has placed him in a predicament, it doesn't justify his actions or the evils he would commit in the name of that injustice. So because of that, Danny began going to therapy and got better, but he always sympathized with the position that Eric and Dylan were in. So he claims that he made Super Columbine Massacre RPG as a purposefully over-the-top statement on how the media and how politicians portraying the Columbine Massacre. There's a lot of talk in the game about things like gun control and about how their playing video games led to all this. And of course, with the second half of the game taking place in hell, it's clearly satirical, at least to some degree. Now, while that's all well and good for an art project, as you could imagine, the family members of the victims of Columbine weren't too happy with, you know, this whole art project he had made. So one of the friends of one of the victims of Columbine ended up doxing the creator. That's how we know his name's Danny and all. Because beforehand he was anonymous until he got doxed, and then after getting doxed, he came forward with all this stuff, effectively saying, "Oh well, it's actually, you know, irony or post-irony or whatever." But because of those statements, Super Columbine Massacre RPG is held in a weird place of respect by a lot of people who are familiar with these disturbing games. Like every other, I hate that I even have to say this, but every other school shooting simulator or RPG is compared back to Super Columbine Massacre RPG as it being the golden standard. One of these games being VTech Rampage, which is a game about the Virginia Tech campus shooting that was developed by Ryan Lamburn and came out 3 weeks after the Virginia Tech shooting. In it, you play as the shooter and you follow the same timeline of events he did, from his first 2 victims to going to record a final video and then going on the rampage before taking his own life. Now the reason I mentioned that, like I said at the beginning of the video, I'm only trying to keep one game from each category here. The reason I mentioned the VTech Rampage game is because unlike Danny Ladon, who gave all that stuff about how this was actually an artistic expression of his position and his mindset at the time, the creator of VTech Rampage said he made it, quote, because it's funny. And he
Jesus
put up
Christ.
these donation goals saying that if he is donated $1,000, he will take the game off Newgrounds. If he has donated $2,000, he will take the game off his website. And if he has donated $3,000, he'll say he's sorry.
What a
It
piece
doesn't
of
matter
shit.
where you go on the internet or how far down the rabbit hole you've gone. It always gets worse. And speaking of, let's get worse right now. KZ Manager is a Zoo Tycoon type game where the thing that you are managing is a concentration camp. That is right, it is a property manager video game set in a 1940s concentration camp. The original game was released for the Commodore 64 in 1990 by the Missionaries. Some of the resources you have to manage is prisoners and food to things like public opinion, and things like public opinion will rise with the more people you execute, but if you execute everyone, you don't have workers to raise capital in other areas, etc. It's had several different re-releases over the years, adding things like visual elements, but all versions of the game center around you controlling one of humanity's most brutal genocides. And to kind of have a final entry, especially after those last few, that's just bizarreness taken to the extreme, look no further than the developer Konguti. Konguti is, and yeah, I'm sticking with that pronunciation, is a game developer who has made some of the most unexplainable, bizarre things I have ever seen, ever. Like, look at some of these titles, such as Merry-Go-Round.
Okay.
Why?
Why?
Intelligent Rackety Paradise, and The Underground Explorer.
What the fuck?
Theories for why these games even exist range from everything
It's
that
schizophrenic.
it is a sensory overload test to see what you can push your brain to the idea that it is some new way to open up channels of your mind, sort of a visual drug. Some people saying he's just trying to give people seizures. All in all, I am sure that it is unexplainable to anyone but Konguti. I went to his website to try to make things better, and it just made them much worse. Almost nothing is known about this anonymous developer, and nothing probably ever will. And I kind of like that there's just one absolutely insane corner of the internet that I can come back to if I ever want to be mortified. The story of Kamikushiki Village was supposedly created by the Aum Shinrikyo cult. Now, in reality,
Oh,
it was
cult.
developed by Happy Soft Games in 1995. The same people, mind you, who did Hong Kong 97, and the game centers around the aforementioned Aum Shinrikyo cult. Now, this cult may sound familiar to you because they were responsible for the Tokyo sarin gas attacks of 1995.
Not familiar.
The game goes on a journey through the cult's existence, from their early days to their rise to political power, and eventually the gas attacks themselves. What makes the game so disturbing are several of the videos and images are taken from the cult themselves. Everything from the facilities where the gas that would take the lives of several innocents was created, to interviews and videos of the cult in worship. Now, while the game is disturbing in its own right for that reason, as mentioned, one of the main theories around this game is that it was developed by the cult themselves as a sort of recruitment tool. Now, I personally don't believe that because, as anyone who's played the game would know, it depicts the cult in a pretty negative light. Like, for example, the leader of the cult, Shoko Asahara, was known for selling his bathwater and blood to members of the cult. And the way that's depicted in the game is with this.
What the
which
fuck?
is, far from flattering. However, several theories come back into play and state that if the game wasn't made by a cult, it was made with the help of some cult members. As many of the videos and photos that are seen in the game don't come from any mainstream news or documentary sources that covered the cult's actions.
Jesus Christ.
So perhaps elements of this game were put together by disgruntled cult members. Either way, seeing killers portrayed in this kind of comedic light with the knowledge that perhaps these elements were made by people who were complicit with the murders when they happened is disturbing to say the least. And then finally for Tier 4, we have JFK Reloaded. Now, a lot of you have probably heard of this game if
Oh.
you're familiar with Disturbing Games
Yeah, I
Online.
think I've heard
It was
this
developed
one.
by Traffic Games in 2004 and is quite literally
It's a recreation.
Lee Harvey Oswald simulator. It entirely goes off the basis of the Warren Commission's findings that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone and shot Kennedy as he was driving away, and the entire purpose of the game is to recreate that kill shot. As a matter of fact, the developer of the game said that the reason this game was made in the first place was to prove the Warren Commission's findings that Lee Harvey Oswald could have taken all 3 of those shots, and everything played out in the exact same way the FBI said it did. As a matter of fact, all the language around this game, even given what we're about to talk about in a minute, seems to be weirdly respectful of JFK, and the idea that this whole game was done as sort of a research tool so that people could understand the logistics of what happened in Dallas that day. When the game came out, they put up a prize offering that said, depending on how the game does in sales, a $100,000 prize would be rewarded to whoever can most perfectly recreate Lee Harvey Oswald's shots. And you want to know the funniest thing about it?
Yeah, what's
this
up?
entire game that was made to prove that Lee Harvey Oswald could do it.
Yeah.
And that surely, if everyone plays a video game enough times, eventually someone's going to recreate it. They were never able to recreate Lee Harvey Oswald shots. They made a simulator to prove that Lee Harvey Oswald was the shooter, and it didn't work. The logistics of how the bullets went and the amount of time to fire and all of that was seen as no way, absurd, and the magic bullet, nope, didn't happen. The closest someone got during that competition was like 60% accuracy out of the 100%
That's pretty far.
scale the game grades on, and he was rewarded about $10,000.
Wow.
But to this day, no one has completed a 100% run of JFK Reloaded. The game also has a lot of comedic elements in it as well. Like, for example, you can set how much everyone freaks out when shots start to fire, and there is a mode where as soon as you fire the gun, everyone starts driving in different directions and crashes into things and people get thrown everywhere. You don't just have to shoot JFK, you can shoot anyone standing around the area for funsies, I guess. And upon looking in the game files, all of that fake deep stuff about we're here to help the Kennedy family and all that seems to be not true, as they do things like, oh, I don't know, refer to JFK being hit in the head as the quote money shot. And people like Ted Kennedy and other members of the Kennedy family said they hated it and it was a disgrace and blah blah blah. And when you think about it, aside from like the disrespect to Kennedy and all that, when you think about it, this doesn't sound like someone that really likes the FBI and wants to prove that Oswald did it would do. This sounds like something I would do. Like, I would 100% make a Lee Harvey Oswald simulator where I'm like, yep, I made this to prove that he can do it, no problem. Oh, what's that? It's impossible? Everyone who's tried thousands and hundreds of thousands of times has never been able to recreate what the FBI said happened that day. Oh me, oh my, what a predicament we've gotten ourselves into. What will I ever do? Like, the developers of this were absolutely trolling. All of that, we're here to prove and help out the FBI, was a load of it. And aside from like the whole making fun of the Kennedy stuff, like calling it the money shot or whatever, the elements of like adding a car crash mode to it and making it effectively impossible to validate the FBI in any way, I for one stand for. I think that's hilarious. I love them. I mean, look at the homepage of the game and tell me that this is state sanctioned. All right, tier 5 is going to be quick. I didn't really know where to put these because there's no other topics to talk about them. But if I'm talking about disturbing games, then it's kind of a cop-out to not talk about them. So yeah, let's just get this over with. So first up, we have 177. 177 is the Japanese police code for a rope in progress. And the game 177 is about just that. It was developed in 1986 by DB Soft and has you playing a character who is trying to 177 a woman he's chasing down in the middle of a field. You do this by stripping off pieces of her clothes one by one before you eventually commit the deed in a cutscene. This is not helped by the fact that the game has pretty much no music, so it's just like this incredibly eerie and violent setting that I think is supposed to be comedic, at least from the way the development and the text around it makes it out to be, but it just comes across as incredibly creepy and eerie. Depending on how you did, if you had low points, you lose because you didn't bring pleasure and you're arrested and thrown in jail. But much, much worse, if you win by bringing pleasure, then the victim decides to marry you and you get the good ending.
Oh my
This
God.
game was hated by everyone when it came out.
No shit.
The Japanese government had a big fuss about it, and eventually the game was recalled. And on the same note of 177 is a game called Ray Play. I think if I enunciate it that way, YouTube won't catch on. And the game is where you do exactly what it says. You play as a guy who is attempting to a woman and her 2 children, aged
God.
17 and 12.
Ugh.
The gameplay has you stalking each of them individually.
What the fuck, Japan?
Before you begin to physically assault them, before doing the task. The game was developed by a company called Illusion in 2006 and is one of the most banned countries in the world. Like for real, everything from sections of Europe to Japan itself to Australia, everywhere has this game blacklisted, as you could imagine. Now, the reason that I talk about both of these games, like I said, normally if there's one game that has this encompassing idea, I'm not going to talk about everything else in that category. But I want to talk about these two for different reasons. So 177 is kind of like the idea of all those old games like Custer's Revenge and whatnot, like old early video games that were, they felt mocking of like a real world tragedy or whatever, a real world evil. But this one weirdly had a lot of people come to its defense, particularly when it started to get banned. What did I say? Particularly, there we go, when it started getting banned. Because they would argue that while that is a horrible crime, it's not viewed as badly in society as, say, murder is. But we have games about murder all the time. Why do they not get banned, but this one does? Two different stories that effectively show the depravity that developers can reach when they run with the idea of seeing what they can get away with. Tier 6 is going to be some of the more interesting urban legends or disturbing stories that revolve around pre-existing games. Worlds.com premiered in April of 1995 and was one of the first 3D meet and greet chat games. And considering it came out in 1995, Worlds.com is quite impressive. It featured a lot of things that would become standard for internet interactions into the future. With things like player-controlled avatars or different meeting rooms and sections within Worlds.com itself.
Oh, wow.
When the game came out, it got attention from people like Steven Spielberg and David Bowie.
Oh, wow.
It was a huge deal.
Yeah.
However, over the years, the tech became antiquated and people lost interest. So why is it on this list? Well, effectively, Worlds.com was this online game where players could interact and talk to each other, but now there were no players. So something more sinister began to fill in the gaps. Now, there's a lot of stories with Worlds.com involving legends of a cult presiding within the video game. Things like a person named Nexialist, which will appear before the player and then lead them into these dark, disturbing rooms before they message them videos and audio clips of like animals being slaughtered. And that's all disturbing in its own right. The idea that there's just a guy trolling around in the game that will just throw that stuff at you when you least expect it. But there's also evidence that supports the idea that Nexialist is just a troll who's doing it for fun and leading people into, you know, rooms with goat heads and Satan pictures does seem like a troll. But what is creepy is how the game has become a hub for a sort of cyber stalking. There are people within the game, like Jimbly, who ask for your photograph and information so that he can then take it and plaster it all over the walls within the custom player-created worlds inside of the game. And while some of these are treated in jest as a sort of gang initiation for fun within this dead MMO, some of these are nude images of participants that had been stolen from their personal information. Or people posing or in spite stealing pictures from other people and then plastering them in the worlds as well. I mean, imagine if you knew that a compromising picture of yourself was just on the wall in this abandoned video game.
This game is still up?
Combined with allegations of spyware and people in the game convincing other people to give them personal data so that they can follow them in real life. While I don't think there's a cult in Worlds.com, there's definitely a stalking ring.
It's just weird shit going on.
I should say there was, because in recent years, Worlds.com has become a sort of crypto, NFT,
Okay.
VR, whatever thing.
Of course.
Which is a cult in its own right, and in my opinion, much more terrifying. Similar in horrortoworlds.com, we have lostboy.exe. Lostboy.exe originally made its way onto the message boards of 4chan. Upon loading the game, the player was dropped into a creepy sort of backrooms-esque maze where strange music would play and images of Satan could be seen on the walls around you. Although seemingly this game had no purpose as there was no real start, endpoint, or objective, and eventually the player would get tired and log off. It turns out that the game contained a rat, or a remote access Trojan. This allowed the creator of the game to achieve his real purpose, which was stealing the personal information and webcam access of people who decided to download the game. This led to a slew of people not only losing their bank accounts, but having pictures of themselves randomly emailed to themselves and other people who played the game as well. The initial story for lostboy.exe was that it was just a creepy game that had demonic imagery and was possessed by some kind of demon, when in the end it was a way that a real creep got a lot of people's real information. Now, some people have made versions of the game that do not have the rat so that you can experience what the original game was, but never trust any of those because there's no reason to risk it.
Right.
So the horror of this game is that to even play it, you are putting your own data and information at risk, as well as your very security through things like the camera on your computer. And you know, this all being delivered through demonic imagery and a never-ending maze, also not great. Berserk is an arcade cabinet that was developed in 1980 by Stern Electronics. The basic structure of the game is similar to other arcade games.
Looks pretty normal.
You play as a guy with a gun who runs through a maze and shoots at the people who come for him while avoiding the game's final boss, which is a smiling face known as Evil Otto. Now, a lot of you who have heard of Berserk are probably familiar with what makes the game so famous, and that is the 3 deaths surrounding the game itself. On April the 3rd of 1982, a boy named Peter Bukowski died while playing Berserk. Or at least, that's how the legend goes. Supposedly, he was playing the art cabinet and became fully ingrained with it when he suddenly and abruptly died of a heart attack.
What the fuck?
Turns out, it is true that Peter Bukowski died in an arcade on April the 3rd of 1982, right after he got done playing a game of Berserk. Now, it turns out that the real Peter Bukowski had cardiomyopathy, and his heart attack was a long time coming, and any kind of excitement could have set it off. However, this didn't stop the legends that it was the Berserk cabinet specifically that caused him to die. Other tales, like the story of a man who hit a score of 66,600, suddenly dying of a heart attack as well as a third death and second definitive death that did happen involving a Berserk cabinet. While it's not exactly sure where it happened, a lot of people say at the same one that Bukowski died in front of, a 17-year-old Edward Clark Jr. got into a fight over whose turn it was to play Berserk next. The person who Edward was fighting was kicked out of the arcade room, and a little while later, that same night, when Edward went to leave, he was met in the parking lot by the guy he got into a fight with and was stabbed to death. Now, there's several legends regarding arcade cabinets, story of things like Polybius and whatnot, but at least Berserk has 2 definitive deaths connected to it. And while most
that is kind of crazy, but like that is, I think that's just
someone
coincidence.
Getting murdered,
obviously,
and someone who was going to have a heart attack soon anyway, just so happened to having one right after he got done with a game of Berserk. Others have said that the flashing lights and the music and perhaps an unseen MK Ultra-esque element of the game causes people to develop health issues and lose their minds in fits of rage. Hence the title of the game, Berserk. Sad Satan was a game that originally appeared on the YouTube channel Obscure Horror Corner. Man, that channel was designed to make me mispronounce it. I slur my words so much. Anyway, in the 5-part series he uploaded, the player walks through these black and white, strangely backlit areas as, just as you're walking, random images of gore and demons and, most particularly disturbing, pedophiles will appear in front of you. This is all done while music is played backwards, intercut with children screaming. The game itself believed by many to be a sort of induction into a satanic cult, hence the disturbing images and images of pedophiles or perhaps group members. There is something, admittedly, like as a guy who sees a ton of content that is shocking for shocking's sake, there's something really disturbing about seeing pedophiles intercut with just regular images of children. Like, yeah, sure, I've seen gore and blood and whatnot, but something about like the true evil that's out there really gets to me. Now here's where the conspiracy sets into it. So Obscure Horror Corner, I can't believe I pronounced that right twice, said that you shouldn't go looking for the original game files because it contains CP. Like, he was cutting it out in his playthrough, but randomly images of CP would pop up. Which, as awful as it is to say, makes sense considering that you see gore, you see pedophiles, you would think images like that may show up in this thing. So people began to look into the versions that Obscure Horror Corner had put out, and they couldn't download it because, if I recall correctly, it was something about the URL. The URL was messed up, that it couldn't actually be a link from 4chan, which is where the game supposedly came from in the first place. So then another version came out that many believe Obscure Horror Corner made as a deflection, because this new version that came out definitely did contain CP, like you'd walk and it just appear in front of you, and people think that the YouTuber did it to prove that he was right about how disturbing this game could be. Really weird and convoluted. But interesting, and not enough people talk about it. Like, I've heard of Sad Satan a lot as being this ultra disturbing, video game or whatever. Not a lot of people talk about the fact that the really disturbing parts of it may have just been a cope so that people would believe him. Similar to Sad Satan, don't play this, not only because of the images you can see, but there are also several versions floating around that contain a Trojan virus. So
classic, of course.
Let the YouTubers get the virus and lose all their life savings. Because, that's what I'm here for. And then finally for this tier, we have Schnell Online. Schnell Online comes from a 4chan post that was made in 2018. People on the board began to recognize the game as other screenshots of it had made their way online. From there, a dark rumor surfaced that Schnell Online was in actuality a middle ground used by pedophiles to trade images of children. This game, in fact, being one of many that are accessed and kept secret on dark parts of the internet that allow users to speak to each other and communicate freely about their nefarious activities. Now, since then, gameplay has surfaced of Schnell Online, but many accuse that of being fake gameplay that was simply used to match the aesthetic of the disturbing game. And even if Schnell Online isn't real or is just some kind of internet creepypasta, it opens the idea that there may be an entire world of game development that only caters to the corrupt. And if all the dark corners of the internet that we find are just the ones that they don't care enough about to protect, then think of all the evil that we don't know about. And then finally, for our last tier on the iceberg, with an entire layer all to itself,
we
have our last entry, Eric Harris Doom Wads. So as mentioned earlier, Doom was the original popular first-person shooter.
Yeah.
And being a game that was played by a lot of people, a lot of unsavory people played it as well. One of the most famous aspects of the original Doom that has kept it alive into the modern age is the modding capabilities of the platform. People can create WADs, which are effectively maps or tailored experiences that they can run on the Doom engine. So basically, anyone who knows how to build a map can build their own map and allow other people to play it. Robert Steinhauser, the perpetrator of the Erfurt School Massacre, created his own Doom WADs and played and shared them online. But perhaps no mod, or game for that matter, has ever been as sinister or infamous as the Doom WADs of Eric Harris. Eric Harris, as mentioned earlier, was one of the Columbine school shooters. Eric, as mentioned earlier in the Columbine Massacre RPG, was a big fan of Doom. He would make several different maps and share them online for other people to play. As a matter of fact, the majority of Eric Harris's Doom WADs are still available to download to this day.
Oh, wow.
Now, while that would qualify it for the bottom of the list in its own right, that one of the shooters had created their own series of maps that people still play and pass around even now, the reason it's reserved at the bottom of the iceberg is because of a reference made in the Columbine school shooting report. In the FBI's report, which totaled over 10,000 pages, there's a reference made to one of Eric's maps. According to the Columbine report, Eric made one map titled RealDoom.wad, which was a one-for-one recreation of the Columbine High School. And according to the report, Eric populated the map with enemies, and time again,
would practice his massacre of Columbine High. But it seems that right there, at least according to the FBI's report,
That's
was
insane.
a one-for-one recreation of the tragedy that he thought about day after day until he took the lives of so many innocent people. And a lot on this iceberg, we've talked about people fantasizing about murder or about doing vile actions, or there's been things that allow people to carry out vile actions. But here we have something that was solely created to fuel the mind of a killer that eventually did just that. And with that, we have the completion of the disturbing and controversial video game Iceberg. While several of the topics we've talked about are, very disturbing or graphic in their own right, and definitely something that you may not want to dwell on, it's important to emphasize the artistry that video games can represent, both as a medium of storytelling, of emotion, of experience, and everything we're talking about today is as far down the rabbit hole as you can look. It's not hard to pull your head out and see all the beauty that's around it.
True.
You have to go looking for
Good
the bad
message.
stuff because
I like
there's so
that.
much good
Good.
stuff you've got to wade through.
Yeah.
But either way, I'm still glad that you heard all
The
of that
iceberg video.
probably useless knowledge, because I think it's neat, and I think you're neat for still being here, and I just want to say thank you for watching. Like I said in the beginning, been a while since I made an iceberg. I made the disturbing movie
Disturbing
Iceberg,
books? That'd be
so
cool.
I figured that this was just the logical next step. I guess the only thing that's left on that trend would be like the disturbing
9
music
hours?
Iceberg, but I don't
Holy
even know what
fuck.
that would be. But who knows? Maybe we'll do it. There's also that period of time where I didn't want to just keep making iceberg videos because I didn't want to get pigeonholed as an iceberg YouTuber, but I think I'm pretty safe from that. Thank you all so much for watching. Thank you for being here. Like I'm a nerd. I like video games, and I've known a lot about this. I've known a lot about this kind of thing forever. Like I remember being a kid and listening to all the like top 10, disturbing games or whatever. So a lot of this was stuff that's kind of been in the back of my head to make videos on, and I was glad that I could finally make it, and I'm glad you stuck around, and I appreciate it. So thank you for watching. Like I said, a bunch of cool projects underway. Excited to announce those when they happen. Thank you all for being here and supporting me, as videos have been slow and whatnot. A lot of exciting changes.
Thanks, Wendigoon. That was a good video. Yeah, Jesus Christ, there was some dark shit, especially towards the end. What the fuck? On that note, we're going to start playing video games.